We are going to continue our study of the life of David and maybe, just maybe, even finish it today. If we don't, rest assured we have one more Wednesday to get it accomplished. It will be done by next week, if not for this week. First, I have an announcement for those of you that are not in Teen Challenge. We have some needs that are in Teen Challenge. There's 4 new guys that have joined. And because they're so new coming in, we want to make sure that they have Christmas gifts. So on the back where we sign up, if you can give a gift for these 4 new guys, they're in the back. I'm going to read this off here real quick. Got Kiori Terry, age 22. He's looking for boxing gloves. Markel, age 26, boots size 15 and shoes size 15. Is that person here? Of course it is, big fella. That's you. Okay. Let's see. And Roberto Montanez, winter boots, he's size 8.5. The index cards with the names and the wish list, again, are at the info desk. And here's the thing, though. This wasn't planned. They came in, right? So it's not like they were derelict in getting this information out to us. It just so happens they got these fellas in. So if you can, we need the gifts by next Sunday, this Sunday coming, so that you know that. I know it's quick, but if you can help out in any way, it would be appreciated. Thank you so very much. Okay, as I talked about previously, we were in the study of David and David's life. Now that is encompassing 2 Samuel. We've been in 2 Samuel quite a bit, probably longer than I want right now, but that's okay. We had left off with David's son Absalom dying. Now if you remember, in 2 Samuel 19, Joab has a conversation with David because David, remember, he's grieving for his son. My wife's laughing at me because I have my glasses at the end of my nose like I'm 60 years old. She hasn't been here for months and months. But the first day she's back, she's laughing at me. I just want you to know that, and everybody online, she laughs at me. So anyways, I can't, this is the truth. I can't read my Bible without it or any print that's normal size. So it's getting to that point. All right, so I digress. So Joab goes to the king. Remember, he is in solitude. The guys are coming back from the battle. And what is customary is for the king to be out by the gates in order to welcome them in. It was a thing of morale. It was expected of the king. And here King David is nowhere to be found. And Joab comes in and he says, "You love those who hate you, hate those who love you. You've made it clear today that the commanders and their men mean nothing to you." Now, Joab is really, he's a commander of David's army, all right? And he's in he could be in trouble here. You don't talk to the king in that kind of manner. So he's taking a risk. But he's putting it out there. You've got to be there for your men, David. This isn't customary, David. Wipe the tears from your eyes. Suck it up right now, David, and come out there and meet your men. Or it's going to be worse than what happened before. What will come of this will be worse than what you were experiencing with Absalom. The next section here, I think, is important. Now remember, this is a time period where Absalom had taken over the kingdom, right? David's running for his life again, now from his son. They have a battle. David seizes control back. But the next section here talks about the kingdom of Israel being in confusion. You can understand that. It's had 2 leader changes in a short period of time. The people don't know where they stand. Understand they didn't have CNN or Fox News for our Christian folks that are here, right? To look at and see what was going on. They didn't know what was happening within the kingdom. So it says, throughout the tribes of Israel, all the people were arguing among themselves, saying, "The king delivered us from the hand of our enemies. He's the one who rescued us from the hand of the Philistines. But now he has fled the country to escape from Absalom. And Absalom, who we anointed to rule over us, has died in battle. So why do you say nothing about bringing the king back?" They don't know what is happening. David is preparing for his return. Remember, he was in the desert kind of area, escaping his son, and most of his stuff is there, but he's preparing to come back. It says in 11 through 14, King David sent the message to Zadok and Abiathar, the priests, asked the elders of Judah, "Why should you be so last to bring the king back to his palace, since what is being said throughout Israel has reached the king at his quarters? You are my relatives, my own flesh and blood, so why have you been last to bring back the king? And say to Amasa, are you not my own flesh and blood? May God deal with me, be it ever so severely, if you are not the commander of my army for life in place of Joab." He went over the hearts of the men of Judah so that they were all of one mind. They sent word to the king, "Return you all of your men and all of your men." So what is going on here is David takes Amasa and he makes him a ruler, he makes him a commander of his army. Now there is bad blood going to come out between him and Joab, because that's Joab's spot, right? That has been his spot for years. He's been a trusted advisor, and now you got this guy coming in, appointed to David. It's not going to sit right. That's all I'm saying. Now, do you remember the story of Shimei? Do you remember as David is retreating from his palace, going out of the city of Jerusalem to the desert area, he goes across this man named Shimei, right? And Shimei, if you remember, is a descendant of Saul. He doesn't really care for David. He sees David as ruining the good time for him and his family. His family has fallen on hard times. Most of the men in his family are dead. They used to have a position of power and prestige, and now they don't. David's family has now taken over. And so this Shimei, as David is going out and his army and his commander is going through, he's on the high ground. Remember, he's hurling insults at David, calling him a dog and all kinds of things, kicking dirt at him, right, and the army as they're going by, and then pelting them with stones, cursing them, right? And Joab at that time, the commander, is like, "Why are you listening to this dead dog? Let me go and cut off his head," right? He's a man of action, Joab. And David's like, "No, maybe this is from God. I'm being cursed. I'm being punished. Why should I do anything to this man?" Well, now David comes back in triumph, and guess where he goes by? This man's place, right? So let's see. Shimei was all about the boldness. He was all about the confrontation when David was on his way out. Let's see what happens as David comes in. Then the king returned and went as far as the Jordan. Now the men of Judah had come to Gilgal to go out and meet the king and bring him across the Jordan. And Shimei, son of Gera, the Benjamite, from Bahurim, hurried down with the men of Judah to meet King David. With him were 1,000 Benjamites, along with Ziba, the steward of Saul's household, and his 15 sons and 20 servants. They rushed to the Jordan when the king was. They crossed at the ford to take the king's household over and to do whatever he wished. When Shimei, son of Gera, crossed the Jordan, he fell prostrate before the king and said to him, "May my lord not hold me guilty. Do not remember how your servant did wrong on the day my lord the king left Jerusalem. May the king put it out of his mind. For I, your servant, know that I have sinned, but today I have come here as the first from my tribes, of the tribes of Joseph, to come down and meet my lord the king." Then Abishai, son of Jeruah, said, "Shouldn't Shimei be put to death for this? He cursed the Lord's anointed." Now you remember David. When David was on the run from Saul, right? The king at the time, the Lord's glory had departed from Saul, right? It was with David. And David refused to lift a hand to Saul. Do you remember this? And he said, "I will not strike, or I will not touch, or I will not set myself up against the Lord's anointed." So David lived this. Who God had set up, he's not going to be there to curse or to smack or to kill or to harm in any possible way. David already had that. And so what his priest is saying is, David, this guy looks familiar. Do you remember when he's kicking dirt on us? Do you remember when he was throwing stones at you? You're the Lord's anointed. And he did this. Shouldn't he be killed? Shouldn't he be killed? He cursed you. David replied, what does this have to do with you, you sons of Zeruiah? What right do you have to interfere? Should anyone be put to death in Israel today? Don't I know that today I am king over Israel? So the king said to Shimei, you shall not die. And the king promised him on oath. What does that tell you about David? Think about that for a minute. What does it tell you about him? That he listened to God. What else? Think about this. Think if it was you. He's merciful, right? Because this is not even us. Who are we? We're nobodies, right? Imagine if you were the king or the leader or the president or something, a big shot, right? Everybody curtailed to you. Everybody did what you said. Everybody had to give you that honor. And instead, what they do is they curse you and they throw stones at you. How would you feel about that? Think about it for a minute. Some of us fantasize about throwing stones at the president. Really? But what would you think about, how would you feel if you actually did that? Would you be concerned that there'd be Secret Service to tackle you? Right? And here we got someone that's greater than a president, that has all authority, a king. And what does he do? He forgives and says, you're not going to die. By every right, he does have the right to kill him. He says, don't I know that I'm the king? I know who I am. I know who I am. I know what I can do, but I'm not going to. Who does that sound like? Yeah, God, Jesus. When we deserve it, we don't often get what we deserve, right? If we all got what we deserve, none of us would be here. And so, yeah, we'd be dead, right? So David is showing a godly kind of forgiveness, and I think that's important. For the many stupid and boneheaded things that David did, here we have an example that we can live by. That when someone curses you, that when someone reviles you, when someone tries to do harm to you, I don't know if he was throwing pebbles or big chunks of stone. In any way, David didn't hold it against him. And I can tell you this, I don't know if I would have done the same thing. I wouldn't have killed him, right? Probably rough him up a little bit, embarrass him a little bit, send him out naked, right, back to his home or something like that, right? But he didn't do any of that. He gave this man his dignity, and he gave him an oath that he would never harm him. That to me is amazing. That to me is a Christ-like type love. That's what we need. Am I right? I know I'm right, even if you don't say so. Okay. So Mephibosheth, that's an interesting name, meets David. Now, this is in the latter part of chapter 19. Now, Mephibosheth is Saul's grandson. He goes down also to meet the king. He'd not taken care of his feet or trimmed his mustache or washed his clothes from the day the king left until the day he returned safely. So just one word, you, right? Gross. Why do you think he did that? What do you think that was about? Who said that? Grief. It was a sign of grief, right? It was a sign of mourning. Kind of like, when it talks about them tearing their clothes, putting on sackcloth, sitting in ash, throwing the ash on their head. This is what this guy was doing to grieve David being gone. It was his sorrow. And so he didn't take care of his hygiene this whole time. And I don't know how long that was, but it had to be a long time because the author puts it out here. He didn't even wash his clothes. This guy was nasty, right? So he comes down to the king. And when he goes to meet the king, King David says, "Why didn't you go with me?" He said, "My lord the king, since I am your servant, I'm lame. I'll have my donkey saddled and we'll ride out on it. I'll go meet the king. But Ziba, my servant, betrayed me. He has slandered your servant to my king, the lord the king. And my lord the king is like an angel of God. So do whatever you wish. All my grandfather's descendants deserve nothing but death from my lord the king. But you gave your servant a place among those who eat at your table. So what right do I have to make any more appeals to the king?" And David said to him, "Why say more? I order you and Ziba to divide the land." So Mephibosheth said to the king, let him take everything now that my lord the king has returned safely. So again, David is showing mercy again. It's another act of mercy. It's not as clear as the one with Shimei, but it is, again, another part where David doesn't hold anything against this guy. Mephibosheth, he was in David's household at David's table before. This is one of the grandsons of Saul. Okay. So, let's see what we got here. So this is all stories of David as he's meeting different individuals, as he's coming back to Jerusalem. And so he meets this man named Barzillai, and it says that he was a Gileadite. This guy also came down. He crossed the Jordan with the king. He sent him on his way from there. And it talks about Barzillai being very old, 80 years of age. He had provided for the king during his stay at Mahanaim, for he was a very wealthy man, right? And the king said to Barzillai, cross over with me, stay with me in Jerusalem, I'll provide for you. And really what we're seeing there is that is the customary things, right? You take care of someone, and that person tries to do something in favor for you too, especially someone like David. Now, this guy was wealthy, it says, but David was even more wealthy. He was owned basically everything. And so he says, come with me, I'll provide for you. But Barzillai answers the king, how many more years will I live? How many years should I live that I'm going to go up with you? I'm 80 years old. No, I can't tell the difference between what is enjoyable and what is not. Can your servant taste what he eats and drinks? Can I still hear the voice of male and female singers? Why should your servant be an added burden to my lord, the king? Your servant will cross the Jordan with the king for a short distance, but why should the king reward me in this way? Let your servant return, that I may die in my own town, in the tomb of my father and mother. But here's your servant Kimham. Let him cross over with my lord, the king. Do for him whatever you wish. And so the king tells him, okay, he can cross over with me. I'll do with him what I desire to do for you, right? So they cross over. And this Kimham, I don't know exactly who that is, but I would assume it's one of his close relatives. So this guy's like, listen, I'm old. You know, I'm one foot in the grave, another on a banana peel. Do what you're going to do to probably his son. And so that's what happens. In this time, now remember it talks about it being a time of distress and great confusion. In this time, a man named Sheba starts a rebellion. So soon it says all the men of Israel were coming to the king and saying to him, why did our brothers, the men of Judah, steal the king away and bring him and his household across the Jordan together with all these men? All the men of Judah answered the men of Israel, why we did this because the king is closely related to us. Why are you angry about it? Have we eaten any of the king's provisions? Have we taken anything for ourselves? Then the men of Israel answered the men of Judah, we have 10 shares in the king, so we have a greater claim. And he's talking about the 10 shares of the 10 tribes. So there's 12 tribes. Israel has 10 of them. Judah has that, and Manasseh, Joseph's sons, their thing. So they say, we have more people, we have more territory, we have more claim to the king than you. It's a power play, right? Why should you treat us with contempt? We want to bring them back, right? But the men of Judah pressed their claim even more forcefully than men of Israel. And because they're in this little war of who's going to be the more prominent in David's kingdom, this guy, they name a troublemaker named Sheba, he's a Benjamite, happens to be there. He takes advantage. He sounds the trumpets and shouts, we have no share in David, no part in Jesse's son, every man to his tent, Israel. So all the men of Israel deserted David to follow Sheba, son of Bichri, but the men of Judah stayed by their king all the way from Jordan to Jerusalem. And he returns. So again, we have another situation playing out. And I have written in the margin of my Bible that people take advantage of chaos. When they see weakness is when they make their move. So understand that, right? This is human nature, to try to see a weakness and to capitalize upon it. Sheba sees that the kingdom is divided, and there is enmity between the tribes of Israel, the 10 tribes, and the 2 tribes of Judah. And so, being that he is wanting to put himself in leadership, he decides he's going to stay with Israel and try to coerce them to make him their king. So this is all going on behind the scenes. Trouble. So David returns to his palace in Jerusalem. He takes his 10 concubines that he left to take care of the palace and put them in a house under guard. It says here he provided for them but had no sexual relations with them. They were kept in confinement till the day of their death, living as widows. And then I have here why. Why was this done? Think about that. Now, when David was leaving Jerusalem, right, he leaves 10 of his concubines there to take care of the palace. What does his son Absalom do? Right, he defiles them. He had sex with all of them. Right up on the roof, in a tent. So all Israel knew what was going on, right? Now, what did Moses say that a son should not do? Sleep with his father's wife, right? Nasty. This dude was nasty. And so why did Absalom do that? Absalom did that to lay his claim to the kingdom, to be so repugnant to his father and to the nation, and to show them there's no turning back. There's no chance for reconciliation. This is mine. As David comes back, it makes mention that he provides for them, but he puts them under guard. Nobody has anything to do with them. Neither does he. That seems a little harsh to me. Not that he didn't have sexual relationships with them, but he put them under guard like they were in confinement. That to me was a little different. Like, okay, David, what are you doing? Right? And all I can say to you with this is that it was a different time and a different day. He could have disposed of them because of the defilement that happened with his son, but he provided for them, but put them under guard. They weren't marrying nobody. They weren't having any other relations with anyone else. He was putting that in order as he saw fit. Now, I don't think in my Western and 21st century kind of understanding, I don't like that, but it is what it is. Okay. He's trying to set things in place, and that's another reason why I think that's here. He's trying to do what's right, clean up the mess that Absalom kind of made, and he has made a lot. So now here's a story. Do you remember when we just talked about it, David put Amasa in charge of an army, right, and his troops, and Joab's another commander of the army. Now we have some trouble. Now trouble's a-brewing, and it talks about Joab killing Amasa. The king said to Amasa, "Summon the men of Judah to come to me within 3 days, and be here yourself." He gives them a very specific task. Summon the men of Judah. Make it back here with the troops in 3 days. It says, but when Amasa went to summon Judah, he took longer than the time the king had set for him. It doesn't say why, but it says he didn't get back in the 3 days that was requested by the king. David said to Abishai, "Now Sheba son of Bichri will do us more harm than Absalom did. Take your master's men, pursue him, or he will find fortified cities and escape from us." So this is what David wants. He wants Amasa, which he's given power and he's given him position to go rally the men of Judah to bring them back to him at the capital. There we go. Okay, so where was I? So he had sent him to gather his forces. Why? He's concerned that this man, the Sheba, is going to escape them into a fortified city. He's not going to get this conspirator and possibly more trouble is going to come, even greater than what had happened from Absalom. So there's a time crunch. And for whatever reason, Amasa did not make it back in that time frame. So Abisha goes out. He marches out from Jerusalem to pursue Sheba. And while they were at the great rock in Gibeon, now Amasa comes to meet with them. It talks about Joab wearing his tunic, right, with a dagger in the sheath. As he steps forward, that dagger drops out of the sheath. Joab said to Amasa, "How are you, my brother?" Right, buttering him up. He took Amasa by the beard in his right hand to kiss him. Now that's kind of weird. I'm not touching another man's beard and grabbing hold of it, but apparently this was customary, almost like a handshake. You grab onto the beard, give a little kiss, right? And so that's what he's doing. That's what Amasa thinks he's going to do. It says Amasa was not on his guard against the dagger in Joab's hand. Why? Why wasn't he at any kind of guard? Because he trusted him. Why else? He's giving him a customary kiss, and he saw the dagger fall out of the sheath. So it's not like he drew it out in a threatening way. He saw it fall out, and he picks it up with his left hand. So he's looking at this thinking, okay, everything's okay. Everything's kosher here, but it's not. So he goes and grabs him by the right hand, by the beard, and with the left hand, he plunges the dagger into his belly. His intestines spill out on the ground. Without being stabbed again, Amasa died. So Joab and his brother Abisha pursued Sheba, son of Bichri, and one of Joab's men stood beside Amasa, and he said, "Whoever favors Joab, whoever is for David, let him follow Joab." Amasa lay wallowing in his blood in the middle of the road, and the men saw all the troops come to halt there. And when he realized that everyone had come up to Amasa, they dragged him from the road, and they threw a garment over him. And once he was removed, everyone was able to go on in pursuit of Sheba. Now, what is happening here? What is going on? There's revenge for... There's a couple things. Like, there's hard feelings already from Joab towards Amasa because Amasa is taking, control from him, right? Is how he sees it. Now, he's given a specific order by David to go and do because there's a time crunch. They got to find this troublemaker and end his life and secure David's kingdom. He's given 3 days. He didn't make it back in that time. Joab's like, "You're worthless. You're not following the rules. You're not a commander." So he takes matters into his own hands, and he murders Amasa in cold blood. And his brother, Abisha, is there saying, "Hey, whoever's for who? David and Joab. Follow us." So they're in cahoots. They knew what was going on. This was a hit, right? Yeah, a coup. And Joab knew exactly. This guy's a stone cold killer, right? And what does it remind you of? He's going in for a kiss, right? Judas. It's funny how things play out, right? So he betrayed him with a kiss, kills him. So they get to Sheba. Sheba actually makes it to a city, right? Talks about Sheba passing through all the tribes of Israel, through the entire region of all that gathered to follow him. All the troops with Joab came. They besieged Sheba in Abel Beth Makkah. They built a siege ramp up to the city, stood against the outer fortifications, and while they were battering the wall to bring it down, there was a woman who called from the city. Like, "What are you doing? Why are you attacking us?" Probably is what she's saying. "Hey, we're your family. What are you doing here?" And so it says, listen, tell Joab to come here. I can speak to him. He goes towards her. She asks, "Are you Joab?" "I am," he answered. She said, "Listen to what your servant has to say." He said, "I'm listening." She said, "Long ago, they used to say, 'Get your answer at Abel and then settle it.' We're peaceful, and faithful in Israel. You're trying to destroy a city that is a mother in Israel. Important, in other words. Why do you want to swallow up the Lord's inheritance? And so she's very specific with her words. What she's saying is to dissuade him from this attack. She knows they can't stand against this army, but she doesn't understand why he's attacking them. She says, we're peaceful, we're faithful. Joab says, far be it from me. Far be it from me to swallow up or destroy. That's not the cause or the case. There's a man among you named Sheba from the hill country. He's lifted up his hand against the king, against David. Hand over this one man, I'll withdraw. The woman said to Joab, his head will be thrown to you from the wall. Then the woman went to all the people with her wise advice. They cut off his head, right? And they threw Sheba's head to Joab. So he sounded the trumpet. His men dispersed from the city, each returning to his home. Joab went back to the king in Jerusalem, and no doubt told him what was going on. And it talks about a little bit of the government officials. Joab was over Israel's army, the entire army. Benaiah was over the Kerites, the Pelethites. There's another man that was in charge of the forced labor. Jehoshaphat was a recorder. Sheva was secretary. Zodek and Abiathar were priests. And David had two specific personal priests, right? What is that saying? It's a summary saying David brings back order to a nation that was in chaos. So he has these things that happen that are less than ideal. There's a lot of drama that happens within it, but David triumphs. The insurrection is put down, and his kingdom is reestablished and reordered. Now, that's not all from David. We have some more, and we will finish it next week. We talk about a famine and some other things that are going on because of David's stupidity, basically, in his own pride. But we'll talk about that more next week. Are there any questions at all about what we covered? We're almost there, guys. In January, I'm going to be starting, and Lord help me, a study in Revelation. And then once we're done with Revelation, we'll go into the other prophetic books. I think that it'd be an interesting kind of concept to kind of delve into. This last year, we talked about like the great men of faith, talking about Abraham and Joseph and Isaac and all of that, even up to David now. And so I'd like to go in that direction. I think it'd be interesting. Okay. We'll conclude David's life. We'll also conclude Joab's life. There's an interesting little twist that happens at the end for him. So let's go ahead and conclude in prayer. Lord, I thank you, God, for the opportunity to learn from your word. Lord, I just ask that you would be with us, God, that you would bring back these reminders as we go through that, Lord, to have mercy. God, when someone deserves our wrath, when they deserve what they get, Lord, that we would be like David and forgive. We'd give them a pass. We'd show grace and mercy. Lord, because that is what you show to each and every one of us. Lord, I just ask that you would go with us as we leave this place. Help us to live for you and live out your truth. And I ask it in Jesus' name. Amen. Don't forget, the gift ideas are on the back. If that's something that you would like to do, just make sure you have it ready for this Sunday. Thank you so much. We'll see you next week.